Few regions in America are cherished as deeply as the Appalachian Mountains. Their charm reflects a land steeped in history, with door thresholds smoothed by years of use and shaded trails winding under poplar trees. In the valleys, sturdy frame homes stand proudly, alongside log cabins from a bygone era. Blossoms overflow in gardens, and grapevines weave around the edges of houses, embracing them. Wisps of smoke curl upward from wide stone chimneys. Truly, this is a place of gentle, timeless beauty. The inhabitants of Appalachia trace their roots to Scotch-Irish ancestors, those tall, hardy men and lean, fertile women persuaded by King James I to leave Scotland for Ireland, hoping they'd wed and sway the Irish toward Protestantism. Yet, in Ireland, they clashed more than they courted and battled rather than converted. King James reneged on his pledge of affordable land and easy loans. Instead, he imposed steep taxes on the whiskey the Irish had shown them how to craft and banned them from carrying weapons. These Scotch-Irish held that the right to bear arms and trade liquor was an inherent part of every person's freedom. Thus, in the 1700s, they journeyed to America, bringing their firearms and cravings to settle a vast, untamed expanse larger than all of New England, a rugged wilderness of peaks and hollows. The earliest arrivals were learned, devout Scots who claimed the fertile lowlands by the rivers. They established places of worship, schools, and even institutions of higher learning. As their sons matured and chose brides, the elders aided them in constructing homes farther along the streams, for no true Scot would allow their kin to drift apart. Thus, tight-knit communities of relatives formed, intermarrying among cousins. With each passing generation, small cabins crept higher up the streams where the earth grew thin, and the mountain's rocky core peaked to crew. Near the peaks, the narrow valleys spanned barely a stone's throw from ridge to ridge, offering only a handful of steep, sloped acres for farming. They were hemmed in by dense thickets of tulip trees and oaks so towering that even at midday, the sun struggled to pierce the shadows. Thus, each new generation faced a tougher existence than the one before. In some areas, schools and even churches faded from memory. The scarce roads were little more than paths trodden by animals, used solely by local residents. Consequently, the mountaineers' lives grew more isolated and detached, seemingly as unchanging as the mountains themselves. When illness struck, they depended on homemade cures: pennyroyal to induce sweating, boneset tea to purge the body, buttermilk to soothe stomach pains, roasted beet leaves to draw out infections, red-stemmed ivy juice for skin irritations, and water from tree stumps for warts. If some remedies failed, they used them anyway, lacking alternatives. When a loved one suffered, you soaked a red flannel cloth in lamp oil for a child to clamp down on during a toothache. They even boiled a skunk and had the child drink its fat to relieve asthma. Despite their seclusion, the clans expanded. Women wed between ages 14 and 16, with nearly all married by 18. They gave birth to many children, some say the largest family. Women hardly paused their work to give birth. One woman, out gathering berries when labor began, later chuckled, saying she held a pail of berries and a newborn, unsure which to carry home first, fretting over both. Occasionally, women grumbled about their workload, noting that men sought a wife who never rested, one who could toil in the cornfields without tiring, then be refreshed enough at day's end to cook, care for the children, handle chores while he ate, and bear a brood of children in her spare moments, even milking the cows, since that was deemed unmanly. Yet, a husband's arm around her waist and words like, "Darling, you're a fine help to a man," were reward enough. No mountain woman desired a weak, idle husband. Indeed, these Appalachian folk took great pride in their homeland. They'd declare that up here was the only place worth living. They scoffed at the fertile lowlands, saying the grass there grew so dense you couldn't break it with a hoe. It'd take a whole team of oxen to manage it. A young couple could begin their life in these mountains with little more than a frying pan and a hoe. They'd venture up the slopes where massive trees stood without undergrowth, where locals claimed the birds' songs drowned out the sound of a cowbell. The couple would settle in a fern-shaded hollow near a water source. They'd kill trees by stripping a ring of bark and plant corn kernels in the spaces between. The soil was so soft and rich there was no need to plow. After the harvest, they'd grind the corn at a flutter mill and bake it into Johnny Ash cake over fireplace embers. In summer, food was plentiful. Locals boasted of abundant game, wild turkeys calling from oak groves, deer and squirrels fattened on acorns and chestnuts scattered on the forest floor. You could purchase a pig for $1, notch its ear, and let it roam the woods. Come autumn, you'd hunt it down. And with enough resources, you might acquire a pair of oxen. These were the mountaineers' allies, able to work steep, rocky terrain unfit for horses, requiring no grain or costly harnesses. Yet, life was, at best, a challenge. People described it as a land where you made do, crafted it yourself, or went without. The chestnut tree was the one thing that eased life for Appalachian people. It nourished them, fattened their livestock, fueled their hearths, cooked their cornbread, and funded luxuries like fabric, pearl-handled pistols, and snuff. The more children you had, the more chestnuts you could collect and roast by the fire on winter nights, or haul to market by wagon. A young boy could gather enough to buy shoes, clothes, a doll, or any small trinket his father brought back from selling chestnuts in a valley town. Hogs fattened on chestnuts were herded down the mountain in droves of hundreds. No wood burned better in a fireplace. Chestnut logs held steady heat all night without smoking. Blacksmiths used it in place of coal for their forges. Chestnut lumber sealed homes, and its furniture was light enough for a toddler to move. A broth of chestnut leaves could ease a stubborn cough. One woman, who never married, claimed a chestnut grove provided better than any man and was far easier to live with. To cross a creek, you'd cut a chestnut log long enough to span it, a slim, sturdy pole straight as an arrow that never sagged. If floods didn't sweep it away, it lasted a lifetime. Nail a board across it, add a wire to grip, and you had a footbridge fit for a preacher and his wife. The wood's acid prevented decay, so chestnut drainage ditches didn't rot. Above all, chestnut rail fences enclosed your domain from your neighbors. Splitting rails and building fences was grueling but sacred work, done not just for your children, but for their liquor too seemed destined for the people of Appalachia. Nature appeared to have designed these slopes for distillation, with apples and corn thriving and every hillside crease offering a rushing stream to cool the still's coils. Most families had a small still for their daily liquor needs, selling only their surplus. They kept running these stills long after laws forbade it. No distant lawmaker's decree could halt them. After all, the Lord created the corn and apples, the wood to fire the still, and the streams to cool it. How could anyone deem that wrong? So, they concealed their stills in thickets of laurel and ivy. If they lacked 2 bushels of corn, they turned it into whiskey, easier to carry over the mountain in a jug than a sack. If they had no 2 bushels of apples, they made brandy instead. Apples didn't keep, and selling them meant hauling them miles down the mountain, but brandy could be sold right at home with a steady market. The Scotch-Irish cherished all they brought with them: their hunger for land, their language, and their right to produce whiskey. Above all, they valued settling disputes without legal interference, and the way to do so was with a gun. Fathers taught their sons to handle guns at age 8, sometimes as young as 6. It was vital for men to learn early how to hunt and provide food for the family and to defend themselves. A gun became as essential to a boy as his shirt or trousers, even in his earliest years. Young men took such pride in their firearms that when traveling photographers passed through on horseback, they nearly always posed with their pistols and rifles. There were reasons for this culture of violence. Historians note that mountaineers first learned ambush tactics from Native Americans. In early days, courts were far off near the Atlantic coast, with no sheriffs or constables nearby. To survive, a man handled matters himself. Good men, patient, cautious, and reserved, were also brave, swift, and decisive. They fought their battles to the end, knowing a half-defeated foe would likely seek vengeance. Even when courts later came closer, convictions were rare because the tightly intermarried population meant everyone was kin to everyone else. While others in America hired lawyers, in the Appalachian Mountains, a gun was the only counsel. Brother Will said, "Just let the Lord guide, so that's what I'll do. I've walked this gospel path for many, many days. I know it won't be long until the Lord returns tonight. I'd be on a one-way flight, just a twinkling of an eye away from home. Alongside liquor and guns, a third force dominated the southern Appalachian Mountains, the primitive Baptist Church. Born from old Calvinist beliefs but unbound by formal education or seminaries, it sprouted like mushrooms in every shadowed hollow and cove. Rooted in Scripture, it fed on superstition and fear, sustained by humanity's timeless need for worship. They called themselves primitive to claim they were the original, distinguishing themselves from groups like the missionary Baptists. On any Sunday, 3 or 4 preachers would gather to preach from the Bible's pages. Few could read, yet they believed unwaveringly. One might say, "I believe it, even if it ain't true." They spoke from visions or personal experiences rather than texts. A preacher might begin, "I've no passage today, but I'm ready to speak whatever God places in my mouth, and if he doesn't, I can't." This was called tuning up. As he rambled, it was evident a mere mortal was speaking, fumbling indeed. He'd pause for a sip from a dipper of water by his side, then flip through the Bible, seeking a verse he couldn't read even if he found it. Services lasted all day, with people drifting in and out, some stepping to the pulpit for it. The sermons gave mountaineers something to discuss, vital in a place where most couldn't read, leaving little to talk about beyond life's essentials. Each preacher was, in essence, his own church, setting its rules. Few minded if a man arrived drunk, as the preachers themselves enjoyed a drink. But all were forbidden from taking payment or salaries, except perhaps a jug of wine or brandy. A shy speaker might take a swig and suddenly become a bold voice for the Lord. After a morning with a jug, these uneducated preachers, ignorance being almost a prerequisite, were seen as true mouthpieces for God. An unlearned man, devoid of his own wit or words, let the Lord speak through him. Anything he said was God's voice, whereas a learned man might be swayed by the devil to speak his own thoughts. The more ignorant the preacher, the more trust people placed in him, for he couldn't deceive like a sly city preacher might. Thus, the Appalachian Mountains remained cut off for centuries before railroads and roads arrived. They cared little for wars beyond their peaks, whether in Europe or America's fight for independence. In many ways, it was their own nation, with the Scotch-Irish forming America's backbone for generations.